Good to go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tech Academy's Tech Talk. Thank you for joining. Today, we're joined by Tech Academy graduate David Fryling, who's going to be presenting a talk on web APIs. This talk is also going to be recorded and then posted to our YouTube channel, so feel free to check it out there. And also feel free to leave any questions that you have just in the chat box, and we'll get them to David. Thank you so much for being here, David, and feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Lucy. All right, as she said, my name is David Fryling. I'm going to talk today a little bit about web APIs, the basics of testing them with Postman. I know that when I graduated from the bootcamp, I was kind of like, I know APIs are this big thing. Everybody talks about them. They are part of a lot of modern web applications and just applications in general. And so I was like, kind of like overwhelmed by that idea. And so I just wanted to present today and kind of demystify them a little bit. Hopefully, if you get nothing else out of this, you walk away thinking like, that's totally something I can tackle, and everything I'm learning about the web and web development will set me up for consuming APIs as well as eventually writing them. We're not going to talk about writing them today, but nonetheless, just to kind of bring it down, make it a little bit more approachable for everybody. So let me go here. Okay. About me, this is just a quick blurb. I won't spend too much time. Like I said, I'm a Tech Academy graduate, husband, father, nerd, always. My journey is, I wanted to just kind of put this in there to let you know, like for a lot of you, you probably experienced the same thing. It's not always linear, right? So I was a student forever, went straight, to college, then to grad school, became a master's level therapist. Quickly was like, I don't know about this. So I kind of did like a little bit of like a lateral shift into school counseling. I did that for half a decade before I was like, this is not a 30-year thing for me. So I was like, I need to do something. We relocated our family to Central Ohio, and I thought this would be a perfect time to make a career change. So I gave the trades a shot. And so I was a plumber for 6 months, and I was an AV tech. Learned a lot of stuff during that time, but those were not really something that was going to click for me. During the AV time, I got exposed a little bit to some controls programming for audio-visual technology, and I thought, like, this is kind of cool. I'd like to do something like this. So that kind of like led me into looking into the coding route, and I actually applied for an apprentice program. I don't know if you all have that out there, where they give you an apprenticeship, they pay for a boot camp, they set you up with a contract with a company where you get paid pretty well to be an apprentice, and they teach you coding and stuff from scratch, and they cover pretty much everything. And I was like, sweet. And I got to the final rounds, but I didn't make it. But the seed was planted, and I was like, I'm going to do this someday. So it was back to school counseling because I needed to, make ends meet and have an income. And the good thing about working in the schools is you have summers off and some other things that allow you to take on extracurriculars like a boot camp. So I went back to that, joined boot camp right as COVID started with the Tech Academy, as I said, and that was fantastic. I even had, at the time, I wanted to build like an application, and I was even waffling whether I was gonna make the full transition or just do it as a side gig. And I just like fell in love with it. I was like, I have to do this like forever. So I got very fortunate and joined, or I was a contractor for a company that I'm working for now, and then just recently got another gig. I was recruited by a company here in Columbus, and it's been a fantastic experience. So I'm only saying that just to let you all know that like it's not always linear. You're going to go bouncing back and forth, and if you are most likely looking into career or on your path towards a career towards developer, you're making the right decision. It's like one of the best career decisions I've ever made in my life, and just hang in there. It's tough to get in, but once you are and you work hard, it starts paying off real quick. So just hang in there. Today's agenda, though, back to the task at hand. We're going to talk about a high-level introduction to web APIs, HTTP. I know that's going to sound pretty basic for maybe some of you, but that's okay, because really web APIs are just HTTP calls. That's just all it is. And then we're going to talk just very high level about the types, just so you know they're out there. And then we're going to just go over some basic Postman tools and features, and we're actually going to just demonstrate that so that you can see it. And hopefully that'll get you all feeling a lot more comfortable with web APIs. We're not going to cover in-depth topics today. We're not going to do advanced Postman tools and features. There's a lot of things Postman can do. We're not going to scratch the surface on those. I would love to show you how to dynamically set variables, but we're going to see what time allows. I'd rather get over the basics of APIs first, but that's just kind of a neat little thing you can do with a little bit of JavaScript. And we're not going to talk about how to create a web API, although I do encourage you to research that. They're not as hard to build as you think. I did my first one in like a weekend project, and it was really cool. And I learned a lot. All right, so let's demystify them first. All APIs, they are simple. I really want you to understand that a web API is really simple. It's just application programming interface. It's just a systematic way for two applications to communicate with each other. That's all it is. And most of the time, they're using existing methods or protocols to communicate. So they're usually not reinventing a wheel for an API to communicate. So you might have an application here, an application here. They need to communicate because they're not the same. They're going to use something. For example, in web APIs, they use the HTTP request response cycle. That's it. So what that looks like in real life, an API, and you might have heard this example if you've done any research, or maybe even it was provided in the Tech Academy. It's been a minute since I did that lecture, but they receive a request, API receives it, similar to how like a waiter would take an order from a customer, they relay it to the chef will return the food and bring it out to the customer. So that's kind of that whole process, right? So the customer requests something, the waiter / API goes and backs and gets it and brings back. You don't ever see the kitchen, you don't know how it's prepared, you trust that it's done well, that's all you need to know. You get back what you order. And so when we move that over to a web API, we see a very similar thing. All we did is just replace the customer with a client app, the waiter with an API, and then the backend or a database in this example with a chef. And so you send a request, the API queries the database sends it back to the API endpoint, and then they send you the data that you requested. And that's all that is. Really, really simple. So again, just going back to that, it's really simple. Now I'm just going to go over a quick one. I'm going to speed through this one. So if I go a little too fast, I'm sorry, but most people in here probably are familiar with the HTTP hypertext transfer protocol, I would think, because I know it's covered very early in the course, or if you're just kind of tech savvy in general, you're kind of fairly familiar with it. But again, it's just a simple way for two computers to communicate with each other over the internet. That's all it is. And there's a client computer and a server computer. That's really when it breaks it down. Of course, there's way more complexity than that, but we're not going to go into any of that today. So the HTTP request response cycle looks like this. The client sends a request and they get a response. It's just that simple. So going back to this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to hide the backend because that's not really our concern. Makes it even simpler than it was before. We're literally just saying, hey, I'm going to talk to this API. This API is going to give me something. And so basically a web API is the HTTP request response cycle. They are one and the same. All right. Of course, that's probably a gross overgeneralization, but for the purposes of what I want you to understand from this talk today, that's all you need to know. Okay. So we swap those out. They're the same. Server receives the request, server collects and processes the request, and then returns it. All right. So some stuff that's you may also know, probably, I think I remember covering this in the boot camp. There's common types of HTTP requests: get, post, put, delete. If you map that over something like CRUD, when you're talking to a database, something else that most of you are going to be familiar with or will if you are farther along in the course or the boot camp, the get is like a read, the post is to create something, put is to update it, and delete is to delete it. So that's just the commands that HTTP uses to communicate what you want to do with the data that you're sending or receiving. There's 3 parts to request. These are kind of relevant. We're going to look at these in Postman in a little bit. So the request part, that first part in the request response cycle, there's 3 parts to it. You have the request line type. And so that's like the get, post, put, delete, like I just said. And an example would look like get, and then there's the endpoints right there, use HTTP protocol. Okay. And then similarly, there's the header, and it's going to say maybe something that is actually generally application JSON. I totally should switch this around. This is a mistype on my part, but this might tell you the content type to expect. It just gives some metadata about the request that's being sent, is what is inside of the header. The body, sometimes, if there is one, might be a JSON, and we'll talk about those right now. So you may be familiar with JSON. I don't remember how much we covered that, but if you've taken JavaScript, or you are, it is just a JavaScript object because it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And despite the fact that it has JavaScript in its name, it is actually language agnostic, meaning that many languages can parse it and use that information. And it's one of the biggest reasons that it's the most popular. It's because it can. C# can parse it. All kinds of programming languages and libraries are able to work with these JSON. And it's easily read by humans and computer as opposed to, say, something like XML. This is pretty straightforward, right? This object has first name Sam, last name Jackson. And a computer can read it, I can read it, everybody's happy. And JSONs hold all kinds of information. For example, you see here there's a number. Yeah, I guess I should use this. There's a number here. You have strings, and then you have an array of various types. And I believe you can mix and match. It's fairly loose structure. You could have null, and you can also have Boolean in there as well, even though that's not in this example, but I think it'll be an example used later. The HTTP response, so what's coming back to the client from the server. This is kind of important to know, especially when you're debugging, because debugging API calls can be frustrating, to say the least. Sometimes you're like, why is this not working? So you don't get a lot of information all the time, and that you would get sometimes in an IDE when you're debugging code. So just the general rules, you don't have to memorize these. Generally, you're looking for 200s. That's fantastic. It means, okay, it went through. 300s are redirect. I don't see those very often. 400s you see a lot, like 404, like it doesn't exist. In general, that means you messed something up. Like if you get a 400 back, maybe check your query params, or I'll get into some of that in a little bit, but all those kinds of things. So you want to check that. 500s means something went wrong on their end. So something happened in the server and they messed something up. So you'll get these three, the 200, 400, or 500, and some variation of those generally when you're working with these. So the response anatomy, it also has a top level thing, which is to say that that type that I just talked about. And so the response type is the 100, 200, 400, 500. So right here, you'll see common 200, okay, we'll come back, which is nice. Content type, application JSON would be the header. Again, that's metadata of what's coming back, just saying some things about what that is. And then the body could, again, include a JSON or something else. And we'll see all this again. I'm going quite quick now, but you're going to see this in Postman again, so there's no reason to hang on here too long. Web API, again, this just equals this. I'm just reminding you that these are one and the same. So whenever you're like, what is an API or web API specifically, it's just HTTP request back and forth between two machines. So they are one and the same. Something that's just good to know, you'll hear these thrown around maybe when you're reading job descriptions, things like that. REST APIs, RESTful APIs, whatever they decide to call it, GraphQL and SOAP. At a high level, REST is the most common. It's just kind of a static, stateless endpoint. You call it, you get some data, you read the documentation. That's kind of what we're going to be working with. It's very flexible, it's lightweight, it's fast to set up for both the client and the server. And it's what we've discussed today. GraphQL is super cool. I think it's super neat. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but it's a way to get, it's fast to run. You get a little bit less like overhead and less data flow, but it's slower to set up. It's a little bit trickier to work with. And I'll kind of demonstrate some of that in a little bit. And then you've got SOAP. I've never worked with these, just read about them, but they're more secure, complicated. They're slow. They're just a lot of overhead. They use XML, so they're a little harder to read. But maybe if you're in a very strict environment where you have to send secure information, this, I would guess, would be the way you'd have to do it. So again, here's an example, because I'm a visual person. You've got the REST API, pretty much what you've already seen. They send a request get API with the user ID of 1. It sends back user ID 1 and their name. You could send now to that, and you could say, what's their address? And you get their address. So maybe you have to make 2 calls with this REST API, right? Because it's static, it's set. You're going to ask for something, and you're going to get the same thing back every time. The other alternative too is maybe this stuff's all in one, and you don't want all the address information, you just want their ID, but you've got all this extra data coming back. And if you're, mostly in mobile, I think this is a big thing, or if you're just trying to cut down traffic that you have to pay for all of these things, you want to make it as efficient as possible, which is where GraphQL comes in. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it's super cool, so I do want to mention it. It's where you basically can structure a query inside of it. And so you actually will create like a schema to say what you want data to look like that gets returned. And so it's a little bit more of a complex request and more of a complex response. But I'm not going to go into each piece of this because it's really not relevant for what we're going to talk about later, but just know that it allows you to get more dynamic data. So in here, you'll notice that they can go ahead and structure it, and before it took 2 calls, they can get the information they want back in 1 single call. So GraphQL expedites that process. Similarly, you could go the other direction. Let's say that this was all 1 and you only wanted a little bit back. You could cancel out the other information and get just the information that you want back. So it's just a more dynamic way to make requests to an API. It's super neat. I encourage you, as you look into APIs in the future, to research this. I'm sure that they're going to become more and more popular. I'm sure there's also use cases for these. REST API is going to be perfectly suitable for certain circumstances, so it's not going to go anywhere. But this is pretty cool. Like I said, especially in mobile where you're worried about data downloads for clients' phones and stuff like that. So here's an example. I'm going to show you of SOAP. I'm not going to go into this. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you what this is. It's just 2 XML files. There's a request. There's a response. So, but if you need to look into that and research, I encourage you to do so. But that's beyond the scope of today's presentation for sure. All right, so we're going to get into this part here. Bring this picture back up again. All we're going to do is we're going to be the client app, which is going to be Postman. That's it. So we are going to use Postman, make some requests to a public, free, open API, and respond with data. So I'm going to go ahead and demo that presently. How are we doing on time? Oh yeah, we're doing great. So I went pretty quick, but we're going to literally do everything I just said with Postman. So hopefully some things start clicking if any of that was too fast. And if it was just a review, maybe you're happy it was fast. All right, so let's go here to Postman. They have a web platform, and they also have a desktop. I use the desktop a lot, but they look almost identical. And I'm going to use the web platform today, the web app. And I switched at the last second the APIs that we're going to call today, because the one I found originally was practicing with leading up to today didn't have like post or anything like that. It just really wasn't a terribly great, and it didn't have authentication, which I think would be great to show you. So I switched. So hopefully you're going to maybe see me make some of these calls for the first time, but I think it'll go just fine. I tested a few of them, the critical ones, so it seems to be working pretty well. So just kind of bear with me as we work through that. And if you do notice something, feel free to unmute and point it out. So it's a good learning experience for everybody. All right, so when you're here, and you can work through this or just watch this and work through it later. There's also fantastic tutorials online that you can follow. So inside here, this is just a personal preference. I don't personally like the light theme. I stare at computers all day, so it's really nice to have something like this. It's just a little easier on my eyes. You may have all discovered that already. So we're going to go in here. There's a lot of stuff happening. I'm not going to go over every feature. I'm going to focus on just a few things, and we're just going to do the basics of Postman as advertised. All right, so workspaces, like anything else, is just kind of like your little space. We're going to create one really quick. We're just going to name it demo. We're going to make it a personal one, and there's nothing else we really need to do here. You could join teams. Like for work, I have a team one that we share, which is really nice for the lead developer to kind of take a look at some of the calls I made and help me troubleshoot. All right, so we come in here. Again, we're not going to go through all this stuff on the side. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can look back at the history. You can create some automated flows. I don't think we're going to have time for that today, and it's in beta anyway. But there's a lot of cool stuff you can do here. We're just going to focus on the collections, which is just a directory, right? Just a place for your folders where you can save all of your calls and refer to them later, which is actually very helpful. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new collection. And I'm lacking creativity today, so we're going to call it demo. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead, and there's this little tab here, and we're just going to go ahead and add request. They also, like any good UX, they have a couple of different entry points into that. You could add it right here as well. So starting back what we said, here if the best way to look at this is, so we already talked about the HTTP response cycle. And so this top part here is our request, and this is the response. So this is all the things we talked about, right? The headers, the body, a few other things we're not going to worry about right this second. We'll get into those later, maybe, if we have time. And then there's the response down here, and that'll also have some components too, like the status code will show up here. There'll be headers, and there'll be the body response as well. So it just kind of like we said, this just provides a nice user interface to display everything we just went over. So whenever you're starting with any API call, you're going to get very familiar with documentation. It is like, I mean, you have to read documentation in so many places, but with APIs, it is super, super critical. And your hope is that it's really good documentation. And a lot of documentation I've come across has been pretty good. Amazon's leaves something to be desired. Auth0 has amazing documentation. PayPal's is pretty solid. So it just depends on what you come across. But if you're lucky, they have great documentation. So the documentation that we're using today, and I'm actually going to post this in the chat here. It's not terribly hard to find. You could Google simple books API. It's a pretty common one. And so that is the documentation that we're going to use today. And I encourage you, if you do want to play through, this is a great one to use because it kind of makes a very lightweight version of everything. You can do all the main calls like gets, post, and different things like that, deletes as well. And then you can also do authorization or authentication rather. So I think that is a great feature of this. So here we are, we've arrived at the documentation. This is the glamorous life of a developer. And this API allows you to reserve a book. So that's cool. The API is available at this address. So again, remember, this is just an HTTP request. And so here we are, we're going to use the web in all its glory to make a call. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it right up here. So this is our request URL. This is the URL that we're going to reach out to and reach out to one of their endpoints, which we'll go over in a second. And that's what we will get our information back. So I've put that in there and you can save these. It's going to have us actually put it inside of this collection. You can't save them outside of a collection, which is actually really good. And I think the first one is, let's go back here. Status, that's what it is. Get status. Sometimes I like to put, an action verb in front of it. It may not align to all of the types, but I think it's just good to have that so that you kind of know what you're trying to do. If you've done any amount of coding, naming is super duper important. So you're like, what is that? All right, so we get here. We're going to get the status. It's just a simple API call just to show you some of the basics here. And this is the endpoint. So this gives us a list of all the endpoints here, and there's a whole list of them. We'll get through as many as we have time today. But here's the status, and we're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to paste it over here. So we have the main URL, and then we have /status. So it says go to this URL, go to this endpoint, and we're going to do a GET request. And let's check. I don't think there's anything else. It just returns the status of the API. That's all this does. Super, super basic. So we're going to get to see the response when we send this request. I'm going to save it, send, and that is a response. So just like we talked about earlier, our response is down here. This is the body, and we can view it in various formats, but it is JSON is what they return. So you do have that ability to change that there. And then over here, you'll notice this status 200. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit so you all can see it maybe a little better. All right, so status 200, okay. So it made it to the server and back. Everything's good. And here's the header. We don't really need to go into this, but again, this goes back into all this metadata. It shows you the date. It has a little timestamp. It has the application. See, I got that wrong in the slides. Application JSON, car set. So it's just telling actually Postman what it's going to do. So it automatically knows to set this to JSON because in the header it said, hey, this is a JSON I'm sending back. So just some, metadata and things like that. So we're not going to get into all of this. There are instances where you have to mess with the headers actually quite a bit, but not going to worry about that much today. Just know that it's there. The header is also here in the request as well. We don't really add anything, so it has some hidden ones that Postman does, things like that. Or again, that's kind of not really something you're going to mess with much when you're just getting started with APIs. All right, so here we go. We made our call. We've got our first call made. It was successful. Great. Let's get a little bit more complex, but not much. We're going to go to a different endpoint called books. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I like this feature a lot. We're just going to duplicate like most any premium service right now. You're going to do that. We're going to change the name. We're going to get all books. So again, this is a book endpoint where you can check out a book with this API. And so we're going to go ahead and see what they have. It's like, let's go peruse the catalog here and see what they actually have. I'm going to send it again. Oh, no, I have status here. That's not going to work, is it? Got to go, let's go back and add books. I think I already copied it. No, I didn't. Who knows what I did? All right. That's helpful. I probably changed this one, didn't I? No? Okay. All right. And that's something that you're going to find too. Like all this stuff is super case sensitive and very specific. Well, I mean, the URL is a little different. You have to do URL encoding sometimes. So like URLs can, like, you'll get responses and you're like, why didn't that work? Check what you type, check what you enter in the query params when we go over those in a second. All that stuff is really important to be on, and I've been duped many times by that. So, all right, so we've saved that. We're going to go ahead and see what books they have. So here we are. Open this up a little bit. Got a 200 response, great. And we have a list of books. Looks like they sent back 6 of them. All right. So it tells you a little bit of information about that. It looks like, yep, so return the list of books. Now, something that they do have is what they call optional query parameters. And that is this right here, this params tab. And you can enter those. That's something you're going to see a whole lot. So it's something that we're going to practice here because I think it's important to see how that works. And they are optional. Sometimes they're required, and they are not something that's optional, and you have to put them and you'll get error response in return. So one of them that we have is type, fiction or nonfiction. So we can go in here, we can type in the key. Again, any query param is a key value pair. So when I do type, it types that, you'll see it does this for it. It augments or alters this URL right here, and it adds the query param start, which is almost always a question mark, followed by the key, and then the value, which we said would be fiction. Okay, and it says equals that. Not sure why. Oh, I typed it down here. Huh. I added the ampersand. It's going to get to that next. Got a little ahead of myself. All right, and then we're going to get rid of this because it's trying to add another parameter. So the first one is get books of type fiction. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we have books, and all that they're returning is the ones with type fiction. So it's just a way to basically, anytime you're using any sort of query and SQL, it's just a way of almost filtering your results. Like, I'm going to send you this request, but I want you to only send me back results of this type. So that's what query params do. As you started to see in my typos, you can add another one, which I do think that they have here. Yep, limit. So we can limit the amount that get returned. Let's go ahead and add this. And it has an ampersand. That's how it parses when a new query starts. And they said 1 through 20. So we'll just go ahead and let's do 2. So right now we have 6 getting returned, or whatever this number, 4, 3, whatever. And we're going to go ahead and save and send. And now it only returns 2 results. All right, so we've said, hey, I want only the type that are fiction and limit it to 2. And there we go. Now, something I do want to show you really quick is what happens if you are not within that limitation. So let's say I asked for 25, even though they said in the documentation that we can go up to 20. Let's see what kind of response we get. 400 bad requests. So that's saying you did something wrong. You sent this. I do not have this. And luckily, this is a pretty good error message. It says invalid value for query parameter limit cannot be greater than 20. That's awesome. If you're lucky, they'll tell you exactly why. Sometimes they don't tell you why. You just get a 400 bad request and you're like, back to the documentation, and we're just going to keep trying. So, but this one's great. They tell you exactly what the problem is. So if we bring this back down to something like 10 and send it, we're going to go ahead and get as many as it has. It doesn't have 10, but getting as many as it has. Okay. Another thing too, if we make up a parameter, this is a classic, right? It's like what everybody uses in every demo ever, foo bar. So we're just saying, hey, I'm going to type fiction and type foo and value bar. Let's send it. It comes back with a 200, but it doesn't register that. So again, REST APIs don't allow you to like hack anybody's system. They set it up. They know exactly what they can take and what they can use and how they handle that kind of stuff. They don't have a type of, or they don't have a key value pair with foo bar, so they're not going to give you anything back. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. So that is a basic GET request, which is nice to know. You'll use query parameters quite a bit, things like that. If anybody does feel like I'm going too fast or wants me to stop, please like raise a hand or like just unmute and say so. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of keep plugging away here, and we'll definitely allow time for questions at the end.
Well, one thing, David, I would like to let everyone know they can post their questions in the chat. I've currently got the microphones muted. I will open them up at the end of the talk.
Okay.
But right now you can post questions in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, that's probably more efficient, isn't it? That's great. Okay. So if you have questions, please post them there, and somebody will get my attention, or they can probably even answer them as well, because these guys know APIs as well. All right. So going on to the next one here. List of books, so I can get a single book. So now that I've got these books returned, maybe I want to just get a single one. So it's still a GET request, but now it has this path variable. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And we're going to duplicate this, change the name, single book. All right, and let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Let's copy this endpoint here. Let's make sure we're here, and I'm going to change this endpoint to reflect that. So we're still at the books endpoint, but instead of passing in the query parameters, we're going to go ahead and do another slash and then pass this in. And as you notice, it's actually auto-populates because, you know, Postman is good like that and knows these things. And it sees this little colon here, and it says, okay, you're looking for a path variable. So we're going to go ahead and do that. This is the key. It already auto-filled it because that's what this is representing right here is a key. And then we're going to go ahead and enter the value. So if we go back to this, let's go ahead and enter one. Just simply call the first one, and we should get back the Russian when we do that. So if I didn't mess anything up, this should work. And there it is. And this one has a little bit more information. So this is a little bit more detailed. This is kind of how they deal with it without going through GraphQL is you ask for a general list, we give you a little less information, find one you want, and now you can go ahead and get a little bit more information about it. Okay, and we got a 200 response. We're still good. Everything is golden. Just to let you know, I mean, this is kind of like a feature. This path variable is a feature of Postman. You could directly type this in there because that's really all it's doing. It's just dynamically putting that in before it sends that request because, of course, there's a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes here, and you'll get the same response. So if I went and put 2 in, I'm going to get a different one. All right. So, but path variables are just a way you can use Postman and leverage that a little bit, do something a little bit more dynamic, and pass those in that way. So that is how you would get like a single response back, and again, using path variables. All right, so the next one is submitting an order. So we have to do a post. I'm not going to get too ahead of myself. We're going to try this one real quick. So we're going to do a post. I'm going to give it a shot. Let's go ahead and duplicate. Let's get the endpoint. Let's move the endpoint and copy it here. Okay. And we got to switch this over to the left here. You probably noticed the get. It has a bunch of stuff. Like I said, those are the 4 main ways. Obviously, there's a lot more, but we're just going to do post right now. So I'm going to go ahead and try to make this call. It's not going to fail, and we're going to see why. Or it's not going to succeed. It's going to fail. And it's going to even tell us why. This is great. So we have a 401 unauthorized, which means that we are not authenticated. They're not authorized to access this. So this does require authorization, which is why I switched to using this API. And it even tell you here, you're missing the authorization header. All right, so we don't have that at the moment. So we need to go back to the documentation and see, okay, so it allows you to submit new order, but it requires authentication. Okay, so before we get into how to make this and form this request, let's go down and down and down, and we're going to find authentication. So now we have a authentication call that we need to make. Let me change the name of this really quick. Orders, I think is what it was. So this is how we get a list of all the orders that we have made. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to need to copy this endpoint. And this is a post. It's basically us registering with their system. So submit an order, you'll need to register with our client. They make it super easy, which is fantastic. So we have that, we have post, and this one does not require authorization, but it does need a body, which most posts do. You gotta send some kind of form. It's gonna be a JSON format, and it include the following properties. So it needs to have a client name and a client email. In this example, this is free. You can use a fake whatever. It just can't be something that was already used before. So we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy this JSON object here. I'm going to paste this in. So maybe you noticed across here, we have some different things. And one of the tabs is a body tab. And this is where you will include bodies into your request using Postman. There's a lot of these. You can include form data, form URL encoded, various things like that. We're going to do raw. You can even do GraphQL. I've done that actually. And then that one's a little tricky, I promise. But we're going to do raw and we're going to do JSON. Again, so this is the biggest reason you want to change the type, because let me show you real quick. We could actually keep this text and that'll work and it won't be giving you problems. But you're going to lose IntelliSense. And if you've all been coding for a hot second, IntelliSense is awesome and it tells you when you make errors. So I like to have it in the correct format. That way, if I leave off something like that, it's like red squiggly line like, hey, dude, you messed this up. So I like to have that in there. And this is the example that it said. Let me make sure we send that and it will contain an access token. So yeah, this is going to return to us an access token that we're going to use to authenticate this get orders call that we're trying to make. An access token is usually just a temporary token that is returned from a server that you can use for a set number of time. In this case, I think it was 7 days, but sometimes they're much more short-lived than that. And then you can go ahead and use that to make your call. And it's just a way for them to verify your identity. One way. There are actually many authentication methods, but we are not going to delve into any of that. So, all right, let's go ahead and make this call. I think it's okay. If not, it'll probably yell at us and let us know. Yes, of course, because I didn't change anything. So let's just make up email one. It doesn't really matter. Okay. There we go. Nobody used that one, or they cleared it out 7 days ago. All right. So this is our access token, and we're going to use this when we go ahead and use get orders. So again, going back up to these tabs here that we've really only gone into a few of them, we can go to authorization. And by default, it inherits from the parent. That's if you want to apply the same authorization or authentication to all of these guys here, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and use a bearer token, which is, again, just one type of authorization method. Again, there are many, many. If you actually want a fantastic tutorial on this stuff, go to Auth0's website and look at the documentation, and they just have this awesome like history of authentication. You can just go through and nerd out on the whole thing, but beyond the scope of today. So we need this token because I said we were missing it. So let's go here. Let's grab this. Let's paste this into here. And then that should allow us to make the call now, because now we are authorized. So let's see what orders we have. Invalid book ID. This is the risk of using something for the first time. Orders. Oh, we need a body. We never put a body in there. Okay. So now we're back up here, and we're going to do the same thing basically that we did before. And we're going to copy this and put it into the body of this get orders. So right now I don't have anything. So that is definitely a problem. I'm going to change this to JSON, and I'm going to put this in there. And John's as good a name as any. All right, so send that. And it says created. So we get a 201 response, which is just another version of those good responses that say, hey, we created your request. All right, and they send us back some information here, like this order ID and various things like that. Something I like to do in Postman is save responses sometimes, just that way, in case I clear something out, I still have some of this data. This is another place to do this as well. Thank you for putting Auth0's information in there. So that, yeah, Auth0 I had mentioned just a second ago, they give outstanding documentation, and they have like a whole video series to introduce you to the idea of authentication and APIs as well, and all those kinds of things. And it's really cool. You learn a lot. All right, so we have this information, we have this data now, and get orders. And we went ahead and created one. I guess that is a create order kind of situation, isn't it? Submit an order. I'm sorry. This is a misname. That would make more sense because otherwise it's just going to return an empty array. All right, so get all orders, this is what I was just trying to do, is where you can go and look at the orders you've previously made. So it's another get request. I'm going to go ahead and pause on that though, because it's just doing what we've already done. What I'm going to talk about really quick is variables that you can save in Postman. I think that's a good feature. I know we're running low on time, and if I get no further than this, you've at least seen authentication, you've seen post and get, deletes similar, right? You're just deleting it instead of posting. And so I feel like that is kind of a little bit repetitive, but I do want to talk about variables for a second. So for example, you might get this back, but you don't really want to save it so obvious as a place like this. Like maybe you don't want this to be viewable to other users that come into this. Again, maybe you're back in a team environment and you want to protect this information a little bit. So when you highlight stuff in here, you can go to set as a variable. So we're going to take this token, we're going to set it as a new variable. We have some options here. Here's the value that it copied over, and we can do global or collection. The more restricted scope you provide, of course, the less access people have to it in other aspects. So if you had other collections, the biggest thing, part of it is privacy. The other part is an issue with Postman using the wrong. So if you name the variable something at the global level and at the collection level, it's going to start outwards and then take the last one. That's how Postman works with variables. So you could have two the same name, but it's going to only use that. So maybe you wanted to use something somewhere else, but it uses this collection variable instead, so it puts the wrong information in. So it's better to just keep stuff as close to the call as you can make it. It's just kind of best practice. And then you have like the string, and actually for the name, I think it does that for me. I don't think I have to do that. We're going to do access token. Set this variable. Okay, and you'll notice it does the formatting that I was trying to do. It does these little double curly braces. It's interpolation and angular. I'm not sure if it has another name. And you'll notice it'll have this here. So something I want to look at really quick. So I'm going to go up to this collection, click on these little dots over here. Where is this? Okay, maybe I'll have to go up here. Variables to protect this. Accessing this variables. I thought you could access them right here. Maybe it's here. I'm going to access this variable really quick and show you, but I don't know. Yeah, it's not going to do that for me. Okay, well, so I'll show you in globals. It doesn't really matter. So we're adding something here. So let's say we have this access token here. We don't, but let's say that we do. I just want to show you something about variables really quick. Again, as a privacy feature. The initial value is basically the public one. It's one that everybody can see. So you may want to set this to something like this so that, again, if somebody sees it, they don't actually know what it is. And then you'll set the real value here. So you might actually put that there. And that's one that, again, is just for privacy's sake and things like that. So just kind of best practices for variables. And I think at a quarter till, I'm possibly, how is that on time wise, Tech Academy folks? Do I have more time or should I pause?
Yeah, no, you've got more time, David. We usually go for an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Microphone died out.
Rick, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh no.
sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that anyone can post their questions in the chat.
Okay.
And we usually go to the top of the hour. So we still have, another 13 minutes.
Okay.
So
cool.
It's great presentation though, David. It's awesome.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it's helpful to everybody. So I'm going to just kind of keep trucking along then and move into some stuff. I know we're going to start getting into a little bit of repetition as we make some of these other calls, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you'll be like, oh, I kind of knew what he was going to do there. All right. So we've kind of saved some variables. We're going to lose that or just kind of delete that for a second, but save that, exit. Okay. So let's go back to the documentation. The next one was get all orders. So this is how we're going to just see the call that we made. And I love this little mock API they created because you get this kind of like back and forth feel. So we created an order request. And so we just need to go ahead and make that now. So let's go ahead and do this one. I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to duplicate this because it has the authentication in there. All right. I'm going to call this one. This one is going to be get all orders. Let me rename the wrong one. Goodness gracious. I'm not even sure which one's which now. Goodness. Right in front of you all too. Okay, that has the example, so that's definitely not the right one because that's just the copy of it. So this is the one I want to do. This is the authentication. Okay, so I'm just going to rename that. And then this is going to be, all right. We're going to go ahead and delete this. All right, get all orders. Let's go here. We're going to copy this. It may actually already say that at the top here. Nope, this is the API client. So there's that. So we've got the endpoint put in, and this one doesn't require anything except for authentication. So we're going to remove the body from this, which I think is there. And you can just simply click none. That's one thing that's nice. You don't have to go ahead and delete that. And sometimes that's nice when you're testing them and you're not sure if you don't need the body yet, or you're not sure if that was the thing messing it up. So you can just kind of like temporarily hide it without going ahead and just like deleting all your work, especially if they're more complex than that. GraphQL is a perfect example of that because you'll have like all kinds of query stuff here. I mean, it's a whole thing. So being able to just hide it for a little bit, super awesome. Then we'll go to the authorization. We're going to do the bearer token, and it pops right in, which is fantastic. Let's save that, and we're going to go ahead and see what our orders are. Request all orders. Required a book ID. Shouldn't. Yeah, those do look identical. Is that like a... Oh, I have it set as post, don't I? Haha. Maybe somebody was already going to point that out. Got to change it back to get. Okay. All right. So got to, again, going back to those methods, those types are very important. That is the one thing about duplicating. It saves you a little bit of time, but then you end up debugging. So right here, you'll notice an array. So this is just an array. Sometimes it's actually easier to see it like this. So it's just an array and it has this object in it. So and if we make more order requests and submit more orders, we're going to start to see like comma, and then there'll be more added on to that. So that's something to notice. Something I do want to talk about really quick, just to kind of like flesh this out rather than just repeating everything, is maybe what like a more complex object might look like. So this one is a little bit more complex because it's an array of objects, but you will have times where you need to reach in and grab something at a deeper level. And so maybe this customer is just a customer. This isn't going to let me edit it. I'll probably have to save it as example, and then maybe it'll let me edit. Yeah, so maybe this is a customer object. And so actually it's going to be a whole thing. It's going to have a name. And then, you know, the value for that is going to be John. And maybe it also has something like age, which is a number. So it might have nested properties in here inside of this. So now we have a customer associated with this, but it's actually a more complicated object with a name and an age. So that's something that's important to note about JSON, is they're not always flat, where it's just you go down to that one level and scroll, you might see a bunch of nests, and sometimes they can get very nested. So I'm going to go ahead and do this just to kind of demonstrate it. I might be going a little too off the rails, but again, you guys, you can always come back and rewatch stuff or go follow tutorials if I lose you too much. But something that's kind of neat is, let's say you want to save something from one of your calls. Like maybe when we make this authorization call, we want to, yeah, this is where I messed this up. We want to, yeah, maybe we want to do this. Let's get this out of here. And we want to make this auth again. We might make this call. We want to save the response that we get. And I actually use this quite a bit because I don't want to have to sit there and copy and paste a whole bunch of authorization codes, especially since some authorizations are strung together. So you might make the first one to get the access token, then you use that to get another thing or something. I mean, it's usually a series of things, especially the more secure the API that you're trying to access. And so I like to use this test thing. So the idea between these two tabs is fairly straightforward. You're either going to, this is code that you would run before you needed to make the call, and this is code that you run after, and it is just JavaScript, which is pretty cool. So I might go in here and I might set a variable named HTTP response body. So this is the thing I'm going to get back. And I'm just going to say I'm going to access Postman, and I'm going to do response. So the Postman response, and I'm going to call the JSON method. And that's basically going to go in, it's going to save the response I get back, and it's going to save it to this variable so that I can use this in the line below. And something that's really cool about this is you can use this over here. This is fantastic. So you might be, I want to set a global variable, let's say. So I'm going to set this, and it just kind of auto-populates all of that stuff right there, which is super cool. So I didn't have to go in and Google this, because actually if you Google it, it's a little deprecated code, but they actually provide you some code right there. So the key that I'm going to call it access token. So that's going to be the key name, and then the value is going to be assigned dynamically to, gotta love IntelliSense, this variable that we established up here, and it's going to be dot. Oh, you know what? I think I have to pass that in. I think it's another. No, it's fine. It's a response body. So we're going, okay, that's what this is. So the response body is, so I'm doing some of this from memory, probably shouldn't do that. But the response body, you're going to go ahead and do dot notation to access the different levels of it. So this first dot would be the first level. So we know when we get back the submit order, we got this, I saved over everything, didn't I? Yeah, I did. So but there was an access token at the highest level. I know that there was no more, there's nothing nested. These are all super simple JSON. So I'm going to go back into here, and I know that it's access token. Of course, I don't know if it's like this. Maybe the documentation will actually provide. I'm not sure it doesn't. Okay, so we're just going to see how this works here. But we're going to go ahead and save this variable access token inside this response body. So let's go ahead. We don't need this. No auth. The body is going to be copied and paste from here. Trying to move quick because I know time is ticking. We're going to keep that, and we're going to use some other scrambled thing here. And we're going to go ahead and send it. That should be everything. So we're sending this to get an access token. It does not have, and it has to be, again, going back to how important, spelling and capitalization is. This is camel case, and I used the underscore there. So that is actually what's going to save it. So if we go to our globals, right now we should not have anything saved. See, it's null. There's nothing saved there. It found that there was nothing there and created it. That's another cool thing. I didn't have to go in here and create this variable. It went ahead and did that dynamically when I made that call. But it didn't have anything to apply to it because I used the wrong dot notation to access this. So let's go back here, change the body just enough so that it gives us another access token. I'm going to save it, send, and then hopefully up in globals, we now have this dynamically saved. So now we have this, and then when I go to use this to make my calls, it will go ahead and use that. Of course, now, like I just said, it's using, this is at the global level because of course I can't access the collections one. It is actually going to use the collections level access token, so it won't use this one. They both work, so we wouldn't know, but that is another thing to keep in mind again with those variables, that this will be usurped by any more limited scope. So, all right, I think it's 3 minutes till. I covered maybe a decent amount of ground. I'm going to go ahead and just call it there and open it up to any questions anybody might have. I'm not like a guru on this stuff, but I'll do my best to answer whatever I can.
Yeah, so it looks like Matt says, what's a feature in Postman that you learned about after using it for a while that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Well, that's a great one. I would say it's this variables thing I just showed you, because, and that's part of the reason I wanted to squeak it in there so that you at least know it exists, so that even though you're not going to memorize this, you can go Google it. Because when I was making all these calls and testing all these APIs just before we could even programmatically implement them, they were sequenced, and I had to go make them, and I had to go and copy and paste. So I'd make this call to go down here, and I'd copy this, and I'd go to this order right here, and then I'd go to authorization and copy that in. And that was just absolutely not. Or, maybe I was like, oh, it's even better because I can go to the globals and I can just paste it in here. And I mean, that's all well and good. That's great, but it's just very time consuming, especially since, I mean, we're making tons of calls. So, and those access tokens sometimes are very short lived. So it's just nice to have that. And so I'd say that is one feature, the variables, how to dynamically save them was a lifesaver, because then I could just go click, click, click. And then you can even do these flows here where you set them up and you can just go automate it. So once one clicks, it goes to the next, boom, boom, boom. So it's even cooler. And this is pretty, like a very GUI interface. So it's pretty easy to use. All right. Overload on the documentation. Yeah, good call. Yeah, so they used a different thing. One of them, yeah, was exactly. So it was an overload method, a post versus a get. I was doing the wrong one. So it's the same endpoint, but depending on what kind of HTTP request you send, whether it's a post or a get, it does something different. So yeah, that'd be a good example of that. Point gosh, I'm showing it's XML. No, typically I think REST APIs in particular. So the question was like, when Postman is showing the returns an endpoint, it shows that you can choose different things like XML and JSON and stuff like that. So let me pull this up. So like this has different options here. Typically, the endpoint is going to go ahead and show you or give it back the response type that they want to provide. And those do differ. Sometimes you'll even call the same ones. You'll get an XML with one and you'll get a JSON with another. So again, with like REST APIs in particular, they aren't terribly dynamic. That's why they're REST. They're just sitting there. They're stateless. You read the documentation and what you see is what you get. This switches, and you can switch it to various forms, but it's not actually an XML, so it's just not going to use IntelliSense. And the way so they have built in here, when they go to the headers, they see that it's a JSON, and so they automatically switch this so you have IntelliSense right there, and you kind of read it a little easier. If it came in as an XML and it said that in the header XML here, I don't remember what the / it is, but it'll actually switch to that, and that'll come back, and it'll look all prettified for XML. SOAP. Oh yeah, I was wondering if financial. So they say they work in the financial industry. And we have a lot of SOAP API out there, and I was actually wondering when I was researching SOAP, I was like, I bet you financial uses a lot. There's a lot of regulations, I'm sure, on how data gets sent, and it has to be secure the entire time, and end-to-end encryption probably get into all kinds of wild stuff. And I'm sure that the APIs have to be super locked down, which this was not an example of that today. So I'm glad there was any authorization. That's part of the reason I switched the last second, because I thought at least this one has something. But yeah, that's cool. Matt says that it is heinous. Yeah, I believe that. It did not look fun in just looking at just the example there, and that was probably a super tiny example. But yeah, thank you everybody for the comments. Any questions or anything? Any more questions? Go on. The recording is going to be on YouTube, right, Lucy? Is that right?
Yeah, it'll get posted onto YouTube over the weekend.
Okay.
And
this was a quick and thing. I mean, also, if you go into YouTube for other things, I'm not trying to like sell myself short here, but there's fantastic tutorials out there for free. Like Free Code Camp has stuff. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. So if you do have some questions about stuff and you want people to go into a little bit more detail, or maybe their teaching style is a little different, that's something that I'm sure we've all realized is like we learn better with different people, and the way they teach and the way they explain something just clicks better. So I do encourage you to, if something doesn't quite sink in after today, for me, definitely go out and like research other people and hear it again, and you'll be like, oh, okay, it made more sense when that person said it.
So David, when are you going to have your YouTube channel?
I don't have the intentions of that. I don't.
Well, you presented pretty well, so that was,
Okay.
That was really good.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Somebody said, had you used Postman at all before your current job, or did you learn it on the job? I learned it on the job, so I didn't actually use Postman prior to my job. That's the thing about tech, and you'll notice this when you're all in interviews and stuff. They're not going to expect you to know every piece of their stack. I mean, instructors will tell you that job placement, because you're just going to learn a lot of stuff. There's just too much to learn. Plus, it all changes, especially on the front end, right? Like every 6 months, they have breaking changes in like Angular or something. So like things change. You're just going to have to always be a student of this and always be learning. So yeah, just, you know, it's okay to learn stuff on the job. People absolutely expect that.
Well, I think it's a really good example of what it's like after graduation with you, David.
Mhm.
Like, you know, you went through, graduated the boot camp, learned what you learned, but then you go into your first year of getting on the job experience,
Mhm.
and it's there's so much that you learn
Yeah,
just on
for sure.
in that first year.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's part of the boot camp. I think they say right from the beginning is just teaching you how to be a good student and how to learn, because you're just always going to do that, and it's never. There's no way a boot camp can prepare you for every eventuality ever. Otherwise, it'd just be like your job, and that's what you'd be doing all the time. So you're just always going to have to be learning, and it's tough to get that first thing because it's such a technical field. But you'll, you know, if you just keep applying to enough places. Um, it'll get there. Side projects are always highly encouraged. It shows a little bit of like gumption beyond just the minimum, and that helps. And then you just be prepared to just constantly learn forever.
There you go.
Yeah.
One other question, David, do you know of any other API testing platforms that are used pretty widely? I know Postman is kind of the most
Yeah,
popular.
I feel like Swagger's out there, and I have not actually researched it a lot, but my impression though is Swagger is more of like a documentation of the endpoint. So it provides, it's kind of neat from what again, this is, I don't want to butcher this, so maybe I shouldn't speak to it, but Swagger's out there, but I think it's more documentation focused, and I'm not going to go into any more than that because I don't want to misspeak, but I don't know of any other ones that I use. I don't know if they have a lot of competition. There might be some. Oh, somebody said the curl, the client URL. Yeah, that's like the command line version, I think. So you can actually even see some of that in here. When you go over and you want to move these requests from test to programming, which you're eventually going to do. That's generally the reason you're making all these calls, is you can come over here and see what that might look like in that native programming language. And it has the URL, so that's more of that command line interface version. So it's like a systematic approach to making these calls using this right here. So I guess that would be something if you're definitely more of a command line person. But like, let's say you're a C# person, this would be the language, and then the library. This might be what that looks like if you're going to make this exact same call in here, and what that might look like if you're going to put it in your application. Yeah, sorry, it's really small. And you know, any of these examples are going to be you know, just starting places. Just like when you're researching anything in Stack Overflow, you can't generally just copy and paste the code. It's not going to work. You have to, you know, make it yours. But it gives you a starting off point, gives you an idea of the structure, what it's supposed to look like, how the layout works, those kinds of things. So you can see, look, you've got to do, you know, line breaks and things like that. So.
All right,
Great
cool.
questions. Yeah.
No, great presentation, David. And we definitely are really happy for the way things turned out for you after the boot camp.
Yeah.
So good job with that.
Yeah, thank you guys.
And
you all helped.
Lucy, do you have anything that you want to add?
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. That was great. Next week's Tech Talk is going to be presented by Andrew Owen. He's a recruiter. He's just going to come and talk about tech industry job search. So I'll provide some links to RSVP for that on Meetup and everything. But yeah, thank you again, David, for your Tech Talk and everything. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there are the links just to our next week's Tech Talk.
Nice.
And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you for having me.
We'll have you back, David, soon.
Okay. Uh-oh.
And we look forward. We want you to come into Portland and meet us. So
Yeah.
I'll do that sometime.
I will. It'd be great. The West Coast is fantastic, so we'll do.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.
David.
And yeah, we will see you next week.
Yep. See you guys.